Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for week 2. There's yet to be enough data for me to give you matchup stats and how these players are performing. 1 week is not enough, but it is in the back of our minds for sure on what to expect in week 2. There are some guys that really earned your trust, and you'd like to see them do it again. Other guys you expected to trust that really shit the bed. So we're going to rank the quarterback position, and at the beginning of the video, it's very anticlimactic. It's just a question of who do I have at number 1, but it's always these two names as the best options. Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, very obvious. I'm going with Allen at the top this week because I think that the Jets defense didn't look as good as Cleveland did last week, and even though they're both division games, I would trust Allen a little bit more. He was also 9 points more effective than Lamar last week. So I will give Josh Allen the tip of the cap this week at number 1. He's the best option. Lamar can't be ranked ever lower than like number 3. And even that is pretty rare. So these are the top 2, pretty obviously. And then in tier 2, I do have Jalen Hurts at the top. And I think all of these names 3 through 8 should be started this week. With Jalen Hurts, it's really obvious. He's always in your lineup. He dominated in the run game, but the pass game left a lot to be desired. I'm not totally sure what this new offensive coordinator is going to dial up every week. And last week, Dallas Goedert was his top option. He is unavailable. Who knows? Maybe the chemistry with A.J. Brown is just not there for a few more weeks, but definitely starting Jalen Hurts. He's just not in the same tier as Allen or Lamar. And then at number 4, I'm rolling with Justin Herbert at Las Vegas. He looked like an MVP in week 1. The fatigue from the Brazil travel, plus a road game, isn't ideal. But I think this game has shootout potential, actually. Harbaugh and Pete Carroll is a real rivalry game. They hate each other. And Herbert ran the ball very effectively last week. Last season, he was dealing with a foot injury. I expect that run usage to continue. So that opens the elite ceiling we haven't quite seen since Brandon Staley was his head coach. And back to those Shane Steichen days, the numbers in the passing game might be hovering around 300 yards every week. So love Justin Herbert. I think he's about to be a must start all season. This game in prime time is probably going to confirm that. Herbert needs to be in your lineup. At number 5, we got Joe Burrow versus Jacksonville, who really shit the bed in week 1, but notoriously always sucks in September. And it is still September in this game, but the Jags defense doesn't really scare you. They did limit the Panthers last week, but to compare Tet McMillan and Xavier Legette to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins is pretty laughable. And I expect Burrow to bounce back pretty quickly. This game is at home. I think he'll be just fine. I'm not going to panic on Burrow, but last week was pretty bad. I think it was just the Browns matchup. He always struggles against the Browns. So patience is key. Not going to trade him away. Not going to fade him. I'll still start Burrow this week. I did tell you entering Thursday night that Jayden Daniels needed to be faded a little bit. Not going to be his best game. That Packers matchup is going to be one of the toughest all season. So Daniels still put up good points. He still ran the ball well, had some touchdown passes. He's too good to bench, but I did drop him down a few spots. Like I expected, he wasn't the third best quarterback based on his performance. I really doubt that's the third best fantasy score of any quarterback this week. Daniels was a little mediocre in week 2. He'll bounce back quickly, not worried about him long term. At number 7, though, I'm going with Patrick Mahomes versus Philadelphia. And they were so embarrassed in the Super Bowl. Also in week 1, they got pretty embarrassed. I think they will look better, or at least competent on offense than they did back in February when they got torched. Remember, it was like 40-6. Mahomes isn't going to look that bad in this one, but their offensive line is a little better. I think against Jalen Carter, the Eagles defense will look good. However, one reason why I'm willing to trust Mahomes a lot this year is because of how much he ran the ball in week 1. I don't trust Pacheco. I don't trust Kareem Hunt. I think Mahomes might literally lead this team in rushing on the season. That's going to pad his numbers, keep him very high in terms of floor plays in fantasy all year. I expect Mahomes to be above 20 points. So a must start, I think, even against the Eagles. Even if they are trailing in the second half, he'll pad the numbers. He'll put up points. Mahomes is going to be fine in fantasy. And number 8, I also think you have to start Justin Fields after that Steelers game, he looked amazing, just too good to stop. And you know that the run game usage is not going to go away. I really trust Fields. The elite upside is available every single matchup. And while I'd like to see his passing game effectiveness repeat, I don't know if I trust week 1 that much. I think it can. I think he will look good continuously all season long. So at QB8 in this tier, I could have ranked him top 5 easily. I'm just want to see it one more time before I put him above guys like Burrow, Daniels, or Hurts. That feels maybe overreacting. So at 8, I will start him, but I don't think he's better than Mahomes, Daniels, Burrow, or Justin Herbert. Not going to go that far, but Fields should be in your lineup. At number 9, we are dropping down a tier, and I do think there's a little bit more risk this week, but in general, these are still players I'm starting at the quarterback position. I have Baker Mayfield at Houston at number 9, and he always throws a lot of touchdown passes. That's going to continue. Egbuka is the real deal, and especially once Godwin returns, he has too many weapons for this offense not to put up points. So even though the Texans matchup is brutal, they're definitely a matchup to fade. I don't think you can fade Baker enough, especially at this point in the season when he's healthy. He also runs the ball, and until he gets hurt enough to stop doing that, that's also going to pad the numbers. Expect about 20 to 30 yards on the ground from Baker every week until he really gets hurt. I think until then, he'll continue to run it and scramble when he can. So love that aspect of his game. I don't expect a lot of turnovers, but I do think there will be some punts and field goals. He's not going to have his best game against the Texans. That's not a matchup to upgrade him, but still top 10, still in my lineup. I wouldn't bench him for anyone I drafted other than maybe Herbert or Justin Fields. I think those are the only players you may have drafted behind him I prefer this week. And number 10, Caleb Williams doesn't need to win games in order to be great for fantasy. Last week was really encouraging. The run game usage is an underrated aspect of his game. Last year, he was 11 yards shy from 500 rushing yards on the season as a rookie. I think that could go up. I think the offense will be better. And he looked okay in the first half. He was much more decisive. Once it was unscripted in the second half, maybe it was just the matchup. Maybe Brian Flores is actually just that good of a defensive coordinator. I think Caleb, though, will improve as the weeks go by. It's still early on with Ben Johnson, but the effect is clear. Caleb is going to have a much more potent offense this season, and I think he's going to be a consistent top 12 play. The matchup doesn't scare you against Detroit. I would fire up Caleb Williams. I think the rushing volume as well as the touchdown upside keeps him very viable. The floor is really safe. And the ceiling last week was top 10. He put up over 24 fantasy points against the Vikings. I think that can repeat pretty consistently. So like Caleb Williams a lot. I would like to see it again, of course, but I think I saw enough to trust his floor. I think he's a safe start in 1 QB leagues. And number 11, I got Kyler Murray versus Carolina, and his floor was fine. I thought he'd be a bit better against the Saints, but on the road, maybe their defense is better than I expect, and he was still viable. He didn't burn you at all. And this week, he's at home going against the league worst run defense, not just from last year, but in week 1, they gave up over 150 yards to Travis Etienne. So I expect Kyler to run all over the field. I think Marvin Harrison looked good, so I'm willing to trust that. The touchdowns, I think, will be there. He doesn't have elite upside a lot of the time, but when he does, it's because he runs for over 50 yards, and I think that might happen in this game. I don't think I want to fade him entirely, just because last week he didn't go over 20 points. 18 plus is still kind of his floor. He's going to stay in the streaming conversation outside the top 10, but in the top 12, I would start Kyler this week if I had him. At number 12, I have Drake Maye at Miami, and he had a bad game in my opinion, and still offered over 15 points. I think they threw the ball too much, and hopefully they change their game plan moving forward. He is also really underrated in the run game. So I think the Dolphins defense has already quit. I think they're already packing their bags to Cancun and booking flights already. I think every quarterback is going to look good against the Dolphins. We just saw Daniel Jones look like Peyton Manning. So especially in the run game, I think Drake Maye has that elite ceiling, and I think the floor is going to be high for every quarterback against the Dolphins. This is a spot I would like to trust him. At some point, the ceiling is going to show itself for Drake Maye and the Patriots offense. I like him long term. I think he has a good game here at QB 12. I would like to start him, but week 1 wasn't encouraging enough to know I'm exactly right on this ranking. There's a chance he does burn you and stays around 15, 16, but I think there's a chance for 25 plus this week. Last week, Daniel Jones nearly cracked 30 points in fantasy. Drake Maye could definitely do that as well. Moving on, I think we're entering just the streaming conversation. So in a typical 12-team, one quarterback league, you're not starting these guys, but maybe you don't have a backup that's better. Maybe your starter you drafted is still not ranked yet. At 13, I have Geno Smith versus the Chargers, and he is my favorite streamer this week. I think you're going to see me rank him in the top 15 consistently because he threw for 362 yards in week 1, and especially given Bowers exited the game, I think he could look way better moving forward. I think Geno still has a lot of potential that is untapped. If you look at his career, when he plays in indoor dome games, his touchdown to interception ratio is 5-1. I don't know if that's going to happen this week against the Chargers, but I think he's going to start to look really good whenever he plays at home. And I think this Pete Carroll, Jim Harbaugh rivalry is a factor here. Pete Carroll and Harbaugh hate each other. They really despise one another. This one will be ticky-tack and probably turn into a shootout. I think there is high upside in this matchup at home. The Raiders lost both games against the Chargers last season. And if you recall, 2 years ago, they dropped a 63-point game on LA when Staley got fired. So I'm not expecting that, but I could see like a 40 to 35 point shootout. I think Geno's legit, and I expect Bowers to play. I think Geno will be a top 15 option this week and consistently this season. I think the passing usage is really going to carry him to a high floor and high ceiling. I love Geno Smith, my favorite pickup off the waiver wire. Get him while you still can, but there's a chance everyone sleeps on him for a while. There's a chance he stays on the waiver wire for like another month. There's a chance no one actually respects Geno Smith, but I do. I think he's a good play. At number 13, I'd like to get him in the lineup if I could, but in a 2-quarterback league, that's probably the only scenarios where I think you have the space for it. At 14, I have Bo Nix at the Colts, and one of the worst games of his career last week, only 6.8 fantasy points. He will get better, but damn, week 1 was bad. It's just a matter of, do you trust Sean Payton or not? I do, so I'm still willing to trust him, but it just wasn't encouraging enough. And the Colts defense also looked really good against the Dolphins, so maybe the Dolphins aren't that bad. Maybe the Colts defense is just actually somewhat legit, but they're going to be without Charvarius Ward, their top cornerback, and odds are Bo Nix does bounce back. I think he contributes in the run game. Evan Engram is going to play, so that is positive, and I just can't imagine it looks as terrible as it did last week. The Titans defense might just be a legit downgrade, so I'm still a believer in Bo Nix long term. I ranked him top 10 entering the week, but off of last week's game, you got to be a little hesitant, just a little bit. I'd rather go Geno Smith or Drake Maye if I could. At number 15, I have Dak Prescott versus the Giants, and he handed off 2 touchdowns to Javonte Williams. CeeDee Lamb dropped 4 passes, and Jake Ferguson also dropped a touchdown twice back-to-back on the same play. So that is the main reason why Dak was bad in fantasy last week. He looked pretty good, and I expect those touchdowns to hit quickly. I don't expect them to score 2 rushing touchdowns with Javonte Williams every week and no other touchdowns. So Dak will be better. He always plays better at home. Against the Giants, he's torched them in the past. Their secondary is not going to stop CeeDee Lamb. Love Dak this week. I think he's going to be fine. But he did not run the ball. Other than 1 3-yard rushing attempt as he got out of a sack, he did not run the ball at all. So he's very touchdown dependent, but I think this week it will hit. Give me Dak as a top 15 option. In Superflex, I would start him. At number 16 and 17, I have J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix back-to-back in the Sunday night primetime game in Minnesota. And I do believe the Vikings will narrowly win, so that's why I do rank J.J. McCarthy above. I also think J.J. will run the ball a little bit more than Penix did. Last week, Penix had a rushing touchdown, but I'm not convinced that's going to repeat. That's not really his main skill set. He's a much better passer. So the Vikings defense scares me a little bit. Brian Flores against a young quarterback like Penix, he's not experienced enough for me to feel guaranteed he plays as well as last week. But both quarterbacks went over 20 points, even though McCarthy looked like shit. to start the game. He really came alive after the pick six. He looked like a completely different quarterback. And Justin Jefferson notoriously struggles in Chicago. So at home in primetime, I think Jefferson will look way better. I think McCarthy will keep scoring touchdowns, especially early in the year when there is no film on McCarthy and there's the element of surprise. I think he does benefit from Kevin O'Connell's play calling. I think they will score touchdowns. They lean on the run a little bit, but I still think McCarthy will be okay and somewhat usable. The floor, I think, is high in Minnesota. Last year, Darnold was a top 10 quarterback. So I think McCarthy's a fine play in Superflex, still above my cutoff point before I'm pivoting to flex options at running back or receiver instead of quarterback. And I think the same applies with Penix. I think this game will be somewhat back and forth. It's a rematch of the national championship game between these two quarterbacks. Penix lost to McCarthy when the Huskies lost to Michigan. So I think this is underrated, could turn into a shootout. And in primetime, I think Penix will step up. I like both options from a floor standpoint. And last week they flashed some upside. There's a chance both guys are actually really safe plays all year. I like them in their respective offenses rest of season. So that is the cutoff point. The black line is the last quarterbacks I'm really considering in my lineup this week, but mainly these are low-end streamers and just viable in Superflex 2 quarterback formats most of the time. But some of you are in some pretty deep formats, so maybe you're in a pinch. Maybe you had Brock Purdy, who's unavailable. I'll continue to rank every quarterback, but this is the cutoff point. I'm probably not starting anyone beyond this point if I don't have to. Jared Goff at 18 versus Chicago. The fact they were embarrassed against the Packers is a sign I think he bounces back, but against his former offensive coordinator, that's kind of the main motivation here. I'd be worried. They looked bad, but then the Packers looked so good against Washington, maybe I wouldn't panic. The Lions are still probably pretty good on offense, but the floor is really low. If he doesn't score touchdowns, it's kind of like Dak Prescott. You could get less than 10 points. And last week, Goff only scored 10.9. He did have some turnovers. So I'm a bit reluctant to fully endorse him. I don't think there's a chance he's top 10 like he was last year, but you never know. He could drop 4 touchdowns on you and really pad the stats. There's a chance he drops 25 points against the Bears. I wouldn't put it past him, but I also wouldn't bet on it. I think he's just a low floor play because there is no rushing upside to bet on at all. Goff is pretty immobile, needs to bury you from the pocket. So not my favorite play, but is top 20. And so is Trevor Lawrence. I think Lawrence has a very good matchup against the Bengals, but last week Flacco had some turnovers. Flacco wasn't that good. And Lawrence does run the ball a little bit more than Goff and Flacco as well. So I'm kind of just trusting the nature of this Bengals matchup. There could be a shootout. I think Brian Thomas will look way better. And if Travis Hunter doesn't put up less than 6 yards per reception, then there's also some upside there. So he has some weapons, but they leaned heavily on ETN in the run game last week, and it got the job done. There's a chance this is a run-first team, and we just don't know it yet. So Lawrence, I'd like to see before I trust. He has high upside, but has never been consistent enough historically to know for sure that he's a safe start. So only in a 2-quarterback league, if you're desperate. At quarterback 19, I would fade him, probably going to bench him most of the time. At 20, I was too low on Jordan Love. He didn't do much in week 1 when they cruised to victory. In week 2, he looked really good. So he's got some weapons. While he did lose Jayden Reed, I think at some point Golden will come alive. And there were also some dropped passes and penalties that took away touchdowns. Love could have had an even better game by a mile. So I think there's some real upside. I will be ranking him higher moving forward. And I had him as a dark horse fantasy MVP coming into the year. Based on ADP, he might be way more valuable. There's a chance he's like consistently top 12. This offense could be pretty good, especially once Matthew Golden figures things out. So I like Jordan Love as a sneaky pickup off the wire, but odds are you didn't start him last night. Not too many people trusted him. I should have ranked him higher than 20. Number 21, I have Aaron Rodgers versus Seattle, and it's kind of the same tier as Love here. Like, even if he plays great one week, do you really trust it to happen again? I would like to see it one more time from Aaron Rodgers. I think the week 1 success was kind of attributed to the Jets rivalry game. Trailing against his former team is definitely motivation to throw 4 touchdowns. So I don't know if I believe in Rodgers long term, but last week he was an MVP candidate. 25 plus points, can't dismiss it, but I want to see it again against Seattle, a very legit secondary. If he torches them again, then I would trust him as a much safer play. But for now, I'm not going to start Rodgers. Not yet. There's no rushing upside whatsoever. At 22, I think the last guy you could really consider for the sake of floor would be Mac Jones. And it's just because it's the Kyle Shanahan quarterback. Whether it was Purdy, whether it was Garoppolo, there was always kind of a 16-point floor from the Niners quarterback. And I think Mac Jones will find a way as well to get that done. He has McCaffrey, he has Ricky Pearsall. Even without Kittle and potentially Juwan Jennings, I think he'll be fine. And I do think Shanahan will dial up enough plays for him to have a decent floor. He was kind of in that 14, 15 point threshold last year with the Jaguars, and I think he can offer some level of safety net, but not enough to start. Only in a really deep 2-quarterback league would I consider it. At 22, no thank you. And moving forward, I'm definitely benching these guys. I would like to see Daniel Jones do it against Denver before I actually believe he is legit. But he did have 2 rushing touchdowns. He does run the ball. That always pads the numbers. But the Broncos defense is elite. It's nothing like the Dolphins. This is going to be a big wake-up call after the gift of a matchup he got in week 1. But he's also playing at home. Maybe I'm underestimating him, but not going to push my luck. Against Denver, Cam Ward put up less than 1 fantasy point last week. So Jones might be better than that, but maybe not much better. If he drops down to 6 points or less, wouldn't be shocked. The Broncos is a terrible matchup, but maybe last week was legit. Maybe 29 plus points is going to happen pretty often in this Colts offense. I doubt it. I'm not going to trust it. Number 24, I have CJ Stroud versus Tampa, and I think this game could be a pretty back and forth, high-scoring game, but their defense usually never requires them to do that, and Stroud doesn't run the ball. They don't have much of a run game at all in Houston. He needs touchdowns to pay off, and if he's not throwing for at least 3, there's pretty much no chance he ever cracks 20 points. Last week with no touchdown, he only had 8.7 points. And I don't think it's going to be that much better from a yardage standpoint. Nico Collins probably bounces back, but I don't trust any other receiver in this offense yet. The rookies are still too young. So Stroud has very capped upside. He was terrible in fantasy last year, and until he starts to look good consistently, I don't think I'm ever going to start him. Not a player I'm ranking top 20 if I don't have to. At 25, I got Stafford at Tennessee, and I'm a little worried about this Titans matchup, not going to lie. They actually looked really good at stopping Bo Nix. But Stafford, I think, will be okay on the road. I'm going to trust Sean McVay. However, he's really touchdown dependent as well. He has no run value at all. And if he's not throwing 2+ touchdowns, you kind of have no shot to crack even 15 points. So I'm going to bench Stafford last week at 13.6. You'll get a lot of those games with Stafford. If it's not a really high-scoring game, then the touchdowns just never carry him high enough to rank in the top 20. So no thanks with Stafford unless there's a lot of buys. I think it's probably not a good bet. And then Flacco at 26 at Baltimore, revenge game. First time he's ever on the road at the Ravens. Could maybe lean on the emotion and play pretty well, but I'm not going to trust him, not going to bet on the Browns, no thanks. The Ravens defense, though, might be trash. At 27, we got Bryce Young at Arizona, and week 1 was rough. Maybe the weather delay was a factor, but the Jags shut him down, and that's not a defense I really trust either. So losing Adam Thielen, Jalen Coker on IR, there's very few weapons to trust, and he needs rushing stats in order to have any value. Until we get some consistency in that department, he is not startable, just staying on waivers for now. But he is still above the final tier, the tier that I have no desire at all. Basically, this is the fuck no territory. And if you're starting these guys, I think you're asking to lose. Russell Wilson looked like shit. He still runs the ball, but even against Dallas, I see no upside here. I think Jackson Dart might get the start in the next 2-3 weeks. I don't trust Russell Wilson to have a long runway in the Giants offense. So if they have 3 points at halftime again, I think he might get benched in the third quarter. No thank you with Russell Wilson ever. At 29, I got Sam Darnold at Pittsburgh, and Darnold only threw for 23 pass attempts last week. They just don't trust him yet. And maybe it's because he doesn't trust any other receiver than JSN. Maybe there's no upside at all with Darnold, but maybe the Steelers defense is actually as bad as they looked against Justin Fields. Again, perhaps this is a good matchup to chase, but until we get any comfort level with Darnold. Never going to start him until that happens. I also just can't start Cam Ward until he proves something. Less than a point last week against Denver. The matchup gets better against the Rams, but not that much better. He's playing at home. He will improve quickly, but not this fast. I don't think week 2 is the spot to trust Cam Ward yet. But check for him like in week 6. I think by then there might be a lot more upside with Cam Ward. I think he looks legit. I think he looked good despite some terrible efficiency in fantasy. And then 31-32, no chance with Tua or Spencer Rattler. I think Tua might get desperate, might start to scramble. And last year in week 2, when that happened against Buffalo, he got the concussion, was out for 6 weeks. If he gets concussed again, he might miss the entire year. No upside at all with Tua. Even if he plays well, you are dancing with the devil. You could get a bagel if the concussion happens early in the game. 32, I got Rattler. What are you even expecting? No fucking chance with Rattler in the lineup. So those are the quarterback rankings, all 32. And now let's talk about the tight end position, where George Kittle is on IR, going to be out at least 4 games. That's a bummer. He is old, so kind of saw it coming, but sad it happened in week 1. Hopefully he just stays healthy for the playoffs. That's really when we need him the most. But another tight end that is out this week would be Dallas Goedert, a bit of a surprise. Out with a knee injury, he's not practicing, and that's a bummer. He looked pretty good in week 1. Darren Waller also remains out. Isaiah Likely is still out with his foot injury, and for a long time to come, Taysom Hill is also out as well. So these are my tight end rankings at number 1 and 2. It's very obvious. We got Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. Bowers is questionable with a knee injury. He exited last week's game early, but I really think it was a precautionary measure because Pete Carroll really cares about this rivalry game against Jim Harbaugh in week 2. In division, they need Bowers to have any shot, and I think he plays. I'm not expecting Bowers in year 2 to be this injured where he can't suit up in week 2. He wanted to return to the game, but they didn't need him. They were winning. And I also think they wanted to spot like Michael Mayer a little bit. If they could entice someone to trade for Michael Mayer, that would be great for them in terms of draft capital in exchange. So I do think that factored in. I think Bowers will be fine. I'm not worried about him. I think he plays on Monday night. But the last game of the week, it's not ideal. Maybe you need to handcuff him to Michael Mayer in case he doesn't suit up, or Tyler Conklin. I would probably go Michael Mayer if I had the choice, but odds are you don't need a backup. I think Bowers will be just fine in your lineup. McBride also locked in your lineup. He has such a high floor every week. Maybe last year's touchdown drought is something that will repeat, but even if it does, the volume is just so reliable every week. McBride has an elite target share. He is bust proof no matter who he's facing. And the Panthers matchup, I think, could be a good one. Last week, Strange was pretty effective, and then the backup tight end also scored a touchdown. McBride probably finds the end zone in this game. I would expect at least 9+ points, just like last week, from McBride, even if it doesn't happen. Next up, though, in the second tier, these tight ends were pretty encouraging in week 1. I think they are locked into your lineup. If you have them, you got to start them once again. Tyler Warren versus Denver looked as good as advertised. Miami is not going to be the matchup all year, but for now, you got to trust him. I think based on where you drafted him, the excitement level for him, he answered your prayers, and I think he will be reliable. Top 6 at worst all year long. I don't think there's that many tight ends I'd rather have than Tyler Warren. With Kittle out, I got him at number 3. I also think Pat Surtain covering Michael Pittman could easily lead to him being the number 1 target in this offense this week. I think he's a very safe play moving forward. At 4, we got Sam LaPorta versus Chicago, and the Lions should play a lot better after getting embarrassed by the Packers last week. LaPorta was actually the only Lion that had a good game in fantasy for his respective position. So I think he'll be a weekly tier 2 tight end. I don't think I'm going to rank him much lower than 6 or 7 this season either. I think as long as the week 1 production is confirmed, then he'll be a consistent top 5 option in my rankings all season long. I would give him the green light. If you drafted him, start him in week 2. At number 5, I think if you drafted Travis Kelce, you should also start him versus the Eagles. I personally believe that the injury to Xavier Worthy was intentional. I think Travis Kelce just refuses to be upstaged, and until Rashee Rice returns, especially if Worthy's not 100% or just off the field, there's going to be enough volume to reliably start Travis Kelce. The touchdown is probably guaranteed. I would bet on it against the Eagles. I think the Chiefs don't want to be as embarrassed as they were in the Super Bowl. I think Kelce will play better than he did back in February. So got to start him until the younger receivers are back on the field. The volume's just too secure. And that's why I did rank him above Tucker Kraft last night. I put Kraft in a tier below because he only had 15 yards in week 1. Loved the touchdown, loved the upside. I thought he was a good start last night, but I wanted to see it one more time before I ranked him closer to number 3. And damn, he looked good. I think he really benefit from the Jayden Reed injury. Even though they used Luke Musgrave a little bit, Tucker Kraft looked like the best weapon in the passing game for Green Bay. So he's going to be a must-start tight end rest of season. I think if you drafted him, you got to feel really, really confident after his performance on Thursday night. Ranking him at 6 may not have been high enough. I almost put him at 5, but then I remembered Kelce's volume situation with no Worthy, and that's why I flipped it. Even at 6, though, I was telling you to start Kraft last night. Definitely a good play on Thursday. Number 7, though, I got Dalton Kincaid at the Jets, and he had a great game in week 1, tied for tight end 1 with Brock Bowers, and I would like to see it again. Perhaps the game script was a big factor. They were losing to Baltimore. How often is that going to happen? So there was extra passing volume. That's maybe not the safest bet to repeat, but I do think based on talent alone, they would like Kincaid to be a very consistent, reliable option in the passing game. I think it's possible he's still their best playmaker outside of James Cook in terms of skill players. So I do like Kincaid as a consistent top 10 play. I think the touchdown also makes you really excited. Betting on Buffalo is never a bad decision. So I would start Kincaid this week. I think the last really reliable start. If you drafted him, I would plug him in. Moving on, though, I think we're entering the streaming conversation at the position. And honestly, anywhere between tight end 8 and tight end 19, I think you can make an argument for that player ranked above anyone else. I think there's really a flat tier, and at this point, touchdowns are kind of the name of the game. If you get a touchdown, you'll be very happy, but otherwise, I want to be betting on volume. And I thought what we saw from Harold Fannin week 1 was a sign that you can trust him. I picked him up off the waiver wire to replace Kittle, so perhaps I am biased, but he was more involved than any other receiver in Cleveland. If he can overtake David Njoku, the tight end 1 for the Browns is hyper valuable all season long. So maybe once Flacco gets benched, I'm wrong about that and he loses a lot of production. But for now, I think the volume is locked in and I think there will be a lot of garbage time against the Ravens. So I like Harold Fannin. He was so elite in college last year. I think he's ready to go and I think he can handle this level production. I don't think week 1 was a fluke. I think they like him a lot. I think Harold Fannin is the top pickup off the waiver wire. Love Harold Fannin. At number 8, I would start him this week at tight end, except if you have one of those top 7 players I ranked above him. Those are the only guys I wouldn't bench for Fannin. But if you lost Kittle or Goddard, he's my favorite play to replace him. Number 9, we got Juwan Johnson versus San Francisco, who I also think is worth starting, my number 2 waiver pickup at tight end this week. And it looks like the chemistry with him and Rattler is legit. It goes back to last year, and he might be the number 1B just to Olave. They might both see double-digit targets every week. And I'm not sure if the touchdowns are ever going to hit. The Saints offense is not safe to bet on for that. But I do think he's worth the pickup, at least as your backup. I think that the type of upside he offers is pretty unique. The volume, I think, will repeat. While he has gotten injured in the past, we have seen this level of value from him before. Without Taysom Hill, there's very few weapons you actually trust in New Orleans. Kamara's getting older. He could go down at any time. I think Juwan Johnson's going to be very valuable all season. The bar is pretty low at tight end, and if you get 10 targets every game, Juwan Johnson will be a must start. So good pickup, good start off the waiver wire, top 10 in my opinion. Only Harold Fannin off the wire, I think, is a better option. Number 10, I think Jonnu Smith is also a decent bet for touchdowns. The efficiency was bad, only 3 yards per catch last week. It'll probably look much better moving forward. But he had 5 targets, caught all 5 of them, scored a touchdown, and I think they plan to use him a lot on the goal line. They don't have that many dynamic weapons in terms of athletic talent. So other than DK Metcalf, I think Jonnu is the number 2 target for Aaron Rodgers, and Arthur Smith traded for him for a reason. I think he's worth rostering. At the very least, he's a good backup to have. He was a top 5 tight end last year, and there's a chance he's really consistent in the touchdown department yet again. I like Jonnu as a decent swing every week. Number 11, I do have Zack Ertz, who does bump up one spot because I removed Dallas Goedert. Yesterday, I did rank him at number 12 in the start sit video, and the second week in a row, he scored a touchdown. So the age is obviously a concern. Long term, I do think Ben Sinnott might be more valuable, but only if Ertz goes down. And until then, there's very limited weapons to throw to in Washington. So if Terry's going to continue to struggle, not everything can go to Debo. Eckler just went down with an Achilles. And other than that, Ertz is the next best option. I think the touchdown production is legit. When they need him, he will be a go-to target. So a very valuable option. Was top 10 last year. I think he's going to pick up from the same spot. I think Ertz is a good play. Until he goes down, I think he's at least at worst top 15. At number 12, we got Evan Engram at the Colts, and he is active. He was questionable earlier in the week, but he will play. But I don't think he's a lock in your lineup. Last week wasn't that encouraging from Bo Nix and the Broncos offense. So I do trust Sean Payton long term, but there's a lot of good options at tight end. If you drafted him, you're probably going to start him. But at number 12, coming off a questionable tag, and he did miss some time last week, I don't know if he's my favorite tight end to start, but definitely worth rostering. I believed in him entering the season, and I do think he might be quickly top 10. He could have a very safe floor in the Broncos system. I think at this point, I would start him if I have an Evan Engram in a 12-team format. But beyond this point, now these are the streamers, and I think the position's actually really deep. I think there's a lot of backup tight ends that you would like to roster. At this point in the season, we don't have a lot of clarity, and I think having two that you can gamble with until one proves themselves, I think is not a bad strategy. Streaming the position if you don't have Bowers or McBride is not a bad choice. I think if you're not rostering a top 6 tight end, then odds are you'd like to have two. They can pop off at any point in time. One can be more valuable. So I would roster these players all the way through the top 19. I think they're pretty decent, but I'm probably not starting them in week 2. We got David Njoku at 13, and it looks like Fannin was overtaking him last week, so that's not good, but I'm not convinced he will be an afterthought in this offense. I still think the chemistry with Flacco is there, but he's also injury prone, and if he ever comes off the field, Fannin will just completely overtake him. I'm kind of worried, but not going to hit the panic button yet on Njoku. There's still a lot of upside. He's still very talented, kind of unguardable once he gets going. So maybe the volume flips, but at this point in time, I think Fannin is actually a bit more interesting. And then Andrews also scares me quite a bit. I'm not dying to start Andrews after last week's 1-point game, but last year he was also terrible in September. So maybe it's a fluke, maybe it's not. Without touchdowns though, he's never given you 50 plus yards, and he's getting older. It looks like the offense pivoted to Flowers. In week 1, they didn't need him at all. Derrick Henry had 2 big touchdowns. They were dominating up until the last 4 minutes, and things didn't change once they trailed. The game was over. So Andrews maybe just was a loser because of game script last week, but 1 point gotta be a major red flag. Once Isaiah Likely returns, I would be terrified. So Andrews might be a drop candidate. I don't think week 1 made you excited to start him. I think I'd rather get someone like Fannin or Juwan Johnson off the wire than start Andrews in week 2. I'd like to see it before I consider him back to what we used to expect from him. The touchdowns are not a guarantee with Andrews, and without them, he's pretty bad. So yikes. Not dying to trust him. At 14, I'm probably benching him. At 15, I'm probably benching TJ Hockenson as well. JJ McCarthy didn't look good enough to keep anyone other than Justin Jefferson viable, so not ready to trust him. I think I was wrong on my preseason take. I definitely ranked TJ too high. Last week, I'm not going to make that mistake again. Let's see it before we trust TJ Hockenson. At 16, Jake Ferguson is going to be in the streaming conversation all season long, and he was a bobbled catch away from having it the tight end 1 performance last week. He almost had a 8.7 point touchdown. He dropped a 22-yard target twice in the end zone. Had it hit, he would have had an extra 9 points and gone over 13. That would have been the best tight end on the week. But his best career games have all come against Philadelphia. I thought it was predictable that he had high upside, but against other teams, I don't think that ceiling is always available. So I would like to see it repeat that type of production, but he was okay, only 4.8 points. Without the touchdown, it was nothing special. So I think he has streaming value all year. There's a chance he's more consistent than Pickens in this offense. But for now, I think I will fade him. Tight end 16, worth rostering, but not a must start. That's for sure. At 17, I also think Kyle Pitts is worth a roster spot, especially until Darnell Mooney plays. This Falcons team just needs weapons to throw to, and he will get the targets needed in fantasy. So I don't think last week was that crazy to bet on again, but if he put up a bagel in prime time as well, it wouldn't shock me. So until he puts up like 3 or 4 good games in a row, I don't think he's actually worth trusting. I think at any point Pitts can burn you. We've learned our lesson, but perhaps Penix keeps him viable, especially until Mooney gets back on the field. At 18, I also think Hunter Henry is also worth a roster spot. Maybe he's still on the waiver wire, but he led the Patriots in targets last week. He was tied with Kayshon Boutte for 8 targets, and the chemistry with him and Drake Maye goes back to last year. It's not just going to disappear. Hunter Henry might be the safest bet in New England every week. But at tight end, he's mainly just a floor play. In general, he rarely scores touchdowns. And without it, I don't think you ever crack 10 points. But if all you want is a safe 7-8 points, then go ahead. Hunter Henry's a fine bet in that regard. But against Miami, perhaps is the spot where they just dominate so much. Hunter Henry does crush the position. There's a chance for a blowout here. The Patriots offense could look amazing, just like Indianapolis did with Daniel Jones. So perhaps he's the best play this week, but not the safest bet in general to find the end zone. And then the last tight end I think is worth a roster spot would be Brenton Strange at the Bengals. But in general, most people don't want to roster 2 tight ends. He's probably available, and he's a very sneaky high ceiling play. This position is very touchdown dependent though, and last week he got vultured by the backup. So without it, you're not going to crack that elite ceiling either, but I thought he looked good. I know the targets have to go to him other than Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. There's only Diami Brown in this offense, so Strange is decent. The floor is fine. If you're streaming the position this year, it's very deep. Overall, there's almost 20 names I could argue should be started this week. So I think for now, if you want a backup tight end, it's not a bad strategy at all. And I think there's 19 guys I would roster. With Goddard and Kincaid out, that's more than 20 options. So the position is loaded. The position's actually really deep this season. And if you don't have Bowers or McBride, I would probably have a backup on the bench. Next up, though, at 20, I think Grant Calcaterra at Kansas City is also kind of tempting. He's going to fill in for Waller as he has in the past. He's a pretty decent bet for a touchdown, so not a bad floor play either, but probably at this point, there's too many names to actually put him in the lineup. And same goes with Jake Tonjes at the Saints. Someone has to step up. With Kittle out, there's very few weapons to actually throw the ball to. And he's a backup, so is Mac Jones. Maybe they have some practice squad chemistry. Perhaps Tonjes scores another touchdown. He did last week when he filled in for Kittle. So the Niners tight end is valuable, but at 21, I think I'm going to pass. And then at 22, I'm probably not rostering Tyler Conklin yet, but he looked like the guy in LA for the Chargers. But with the fumble, he still put up 6 points. Yards after the catch could carry him to some usable games. Without the touchdown, though, not going to be going over 10 points. The volume, I think, is a bit scary. There's a lot of receivers for the Chargers. At 23, I think we're probably fading Colston Loveland for now. Got to wait and see. The talent is too high to dismiss, but Kmet ran more routes. He's just not quite ready. He might be a bit too young to trust. At 24, I think at some point Okonkwo is also going to look pretty good in Tennessee. Cam Ward doesn't have that many reliable targets, and the matchup was terrible last week. It will get better. Okonkwo will be more relevant as the weeks go by. At worst, he's the number 3 target in Tennessee. He might be the number 2 option behind Calvin Ridley. Lastly, at 25, I am also ranking Jatavion Sanders in Carolina. Other than Tet McMillan, there are very few weapons that you trust. So they need some playmakers. Jatavion can give you 40 yards if you need it. And I think the year 2 option will look worth rostering pretty soon. I think he also has some waiver appeal pretty quickly in the season. So those are my top 25 tight ends. The position's actually kind of deeper than we expected. And then these are my defenses for week 2. At 1 and 2, I think it's very obvious the Niners at New Orleans. You want to be chasing the Spencer Rattler matchup all season. So very obvious start. They're my number 1 this week. And then at number 2, we got the Broncos at the Colts. Broncos feel locked into the top 5 all year. They have overall the best roster on defense I can think of. So those are the elite options. The Broncos are probably always going to be in this top tier. The Colts don't scare me. And then in tier 2, I think based on talent and matchup, the Rams have to be started. They looked amazing against Houston. They'll look amazing against a rookie quarterback. I definitely want the Rams in my lineup. And then the Patriots at Miami, I think that this matchup is legit. They gave up 15 fantasy points to the Colts defense, and I think the Patriots will step up. So the Dolphins, just like the Saints, are one of the worst teams in the NFL. I want this matchup if I'm streaming the position. And then the Steelers, I think, will bounce back significantly at home after the Jets game when they got embarrassed. Gave up 32 points. So maybe they're just that bad, but the Sam Darnold experience didn't look trustworthy on offense yet. I think the Seahawks will keep this game low scoring. I like the Steelers defense at home in week 2 against Sam Darnold. At 6, I also think the Ravens versus Cleveland is going to be way better than last week. They were negative against Buffalo. The Browns are always a good spot. Last week, the Bengals put up 7 points against Cleveland. So I think the Ravens will be fine. Top 10 every week for anyone going up against the Browns. And then dropping down a tier, I still think these guys have a safe enough floor where I would start them. I have the Cardinals versus the Panthers. The Panthers looked really bad, and Arizona is now playing at home. Their defense is improved. They weren't as good as I thought against the Saints last week, but I think they'll step up. It'll be a low-scoring game at home against the Panthers. And then I also told you to start the Packers last night. From a floor standpoint, that was the right call. They got 7 points in my format, and I think their schedule really opens up rest of season. They look like potentially the best defense in the league. They are a valuable asset to have. I think I'm going to rank them at number 1 next week against Cleveland. At number 9, I'm going to trust the talent of the Texans versus Tampa Bay. Not the best matchup against Baker Mayfield. He can always score touchdowns, but it wasn't a good matchup against the Rams last week, and they also scored 9 points. So a floor play every single week. They're one of the most elite defenses in the NFL, and maybe not as elite as the Broncos, but I think they are in that top 5 conversation for defenses across the league. I trust the Texans on a weekly basis. At number 10, I also think the Seahawks could be a top 5 defense as well. And they get the Steelers. I don't think Rodgers is actually that elite. I think the Jets matchup, the revenge game, and also losing, coming back factored in. I don't expect Rodgers to throw 4 touchdowns every single week. So not expecting him to be an MVP candidate. I trust the Seahawks defense overall. From a floor standpoint, just like last week, probably get 7+ points from Seattle. Next up, though, these are kind of the low-end streamers. I would go with the Cowboys just because they're facing the Giants at number 11. Giants look so bad, potentially the second worst offense in the league. With Russell Wilson, that's definitely a matchup to chase as well, but the Cowboys don't have like the best personnel. Without Micah, there's not that elite ceiling we've seen from them in the past, but maybe a turnover, maybe a pick 6 is incoming. That's definitely possible. At number 12, I got the Saints versus San Francisco, and last week against Arizona, they were actually pretty good, put up 9 points against Kyler Murray. They get Mac Jones and a very injured roster. There's a lot of backups for the Niners offense. I think the Saints keep this somewhat respectable in terms of the scoreboard. They'll definitely lose, but kind of like the Cardinals game, I think they hold their opponent to less than 25, and that's going to be usable. Maybe not amazing, but somewhat usable. At 13, we got the Eagles at the Chiefs, and either they're going to dominate like they did in the Super Bowl, or they let this game be competitive and Mahomes does step up after being embarrassed the last 2 games. Especially in February, they probably want to look a lot better against Philly. So a revenge game here for the Chiefs. I don't think they'll be amazing in fantasy. The Eagles probably give up a lot of garbage time stats. Mahomes will put up yards in the second half and keep this game interesting. But Jalen Carter ejected probably is why they suck so bad at stopping the run against the Cowboys. I think they are much better than last week would have suggested. But they didn't look good week 1. Can't pretend like they made me excited where you have to start them every week. This matchup could be bad, but there's also the travel from Brazil to factor in. I think the Eagles are fine from a floor standpoint. At 14, I got the Vikings versus the Falcons, and I love Brian Flores, but they weren't elite for fantasy against Chicago last week. I think Atlanta could play very well on offense here, but a young quarterback probably struggles against the disguised defenses of Brian Flores. I think the schedule will look way better after the Bengals game in week 3. The Vikings will be top 10 a lot, but this week I think they're just top 15 against Michael Penix in primetime. At 15, we got the Bucks at Houston, and Tampa Bay I think will keep the game close, but I am worried about Nico Collins bouncing back in a major way. Beyond that, however, there's really nobody on Houston's offense that scares you. So the game I think will be low scoring. I think the Bucks could win, but I think their defense will keep it within like a touchdown. I don't think the Texans drop more than like 21, 24 points in this game. It's probably like a 20-17 type of score. So I think the floor is high, but the ceiling probably not elite. And then beyond this point, I'm benching every other defense. But in the top 20, I do have the Commanders. They were not that good against the Packers. They also benefit from some drop passes and penalties. So this ranking was actually way too high, most likely. And then at 17, the Panthers at Arizona. The Cardinals didn't look elite on offense, so there's a chance the Panthers do step up on the road. The Falcons at Minnesota, I think, could benefit. J.J. McCarthy looked terrible early in the game, but the Vikings can run the ball. Jefferson probably plays a lot better at home. I think they're an interesting play, but not a must start. The Falcons haven't proven enough on defense yet for me to trust him. But then the Bills at the Jets, maybe their defense is trash, but in general, the Jets have been a good matchup. Maybe Justin Fields, though, is not the quarterback you want to go up against. So I'm reluctant to actually start them. Maybe they're not that safe after all. And then last defense I would even consider would be the Colts versus Denver, because they looked really good last week. But I think it was just the Dolphins matchup. But the Broncos also looked terrible against Tennessee. So I could be ranking the Colts 10 spots too low. But in general, I don't want to bet against Sean Payton. I don't think the Colts are safe enough to trust just yet. I think the Dolphins are just that bad. Not that the Colts are that good. But potential sneaky play here with Indy versus Denver. I don't think Bo Nix is that scary at the end of the day. Beyond that, though, I'm not starting anyone outside the top 20. I got the Lions, Titans, Chiefs, Bears, and Chargers in the next tier. Too many shootout potential here, and not enough has been proven from any defense yet this season, so no thanks there. And then the Raiders, Giants, Bengals, Jags, Browns, Jets, Dolphins are in my final tier. I think it's a fuck no based on matchup. There is no chance. I'm trusting mostly some really mediocre defenses, but maybe the Browns do step up in division. Against Lamar, however, I would rather say fuck no. So those are my rankings at all three positions. We got the quarterbacks, where obviously the top 2 are elite, but I think the top 8 are all must starts. And then Baker probably has a diminished game against Houston, but him, Caleb, Kyler, and Drake May, I think are all in your lineup. All have some very good rushing potential as well. And then my most coveted streamers, my favorite on the week is Geno, and I think he's in the same tier as guys like Bo Nix, Dak Prescott, J.J. McCarthy, and Michael Penix. If any of those guys put up over 20 points this week, I wouldn't be surprised, but maybe you want to wait and see just a little bit. Last week was kind of concerning for guys like Bo Nix and Dak Prescott. Neither of them went over 10 points. That's why I can't rank them in the top 12. But they are startable in Superflex formats. Once we pass Penix, though, I think you're pretty much gambling and probably going to get burned. I'd rather bench Goff, Lawrence, Love, Rodgers, and Mac Jones, but maybe they have enough upside based on their respective talent that they really play well. Love did play really well against Washington, and that's kind of the same potential of all 5 of these guys. There's a chance they really do pop, but I probably wouldn't start them, especially not in a one quarterback setting. And then after that, after Mac Jones, I'm not starting anyone. If you want to see those rankings, you can rewind in the video. And then at tight end, I think the top 7 are all locked in your lineup based on week 1 performances. Those are the safe guys that you drafted. I would definitely start if I had. But starting with Harold Fannin through Evan Engram, the volume and touchdown production from week 1 is what I'm betting on. Those are the guys I would be starting on the lower end of the top 12. However, I do think there's almost 20 tight ends that you could argue should be started this week. I think the position's very deep. And David Njoku at 13, all the way through Brenton Strange at 19, I think are legit. So not bad options. I even think Grant Calcaterra, Jake Tonjes, and Tyler Conklin offer some upside as well. Tight end looks kind of loaded. There's actually some really good value at that position, but maybe as the receivers get more comfortable, those fantasy points go to other positions. Maybe it's all a smokescreen and tight end is still a crapshoot after the top 10. Lastly, though, with defenses, I'd be starting the top 6 no matter what. Love the matchups, love their talent, and I think they'll show up. And then I also think the top 15 have an argument to be started as well. But based on talent, I'd rather stick to the top 10. I think the Cowboys, Saints, Eagles, Vikings, and Bucks have just one too many red flags where I'm not dying to fully trust them this week, but probably deserve to be in consideration for your lineup. Beyond the Bucks, however, I think I'm going to pass. I think it's a little too risky at that point. You only have to start one defense. So odds are, beyond the top 15, no one's even considered in your lineup. But I might be too low on teams like the Bills, the Colts, and maybe even the Titans. The Titans, I think, are kind of sneaky this week as well. But that's it for me. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll be updating all of my rankings tomorrow with all of the injury news and final updates. Make sure you ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss out on that. But as always, if you have any questions, drop them in the comment section below, and I will see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.